The letter that broke the silence. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It wasn't the kind of rain that thundered down in sheets or made people rush under shelters. No, it was soft and quiet. The kind of rain that blurred the edges of buildings and soaked slowly into your skin, like sorrow you didn't know you carried until it settled in. The sky was gray, as if it had forgotten how to be anything else, and through the misty window of his quiet Los Angeles home, Keanu Reeves sat still, his silhouette unmoving in the fading light. His hands rested gently on the arms of the old wooden chair that once belonged to his mother, his eyes locked on a single sheet of paper that lay on the table before him. A letter. Folded. Unopened. It had arrived 3 days ago, postmarked from Italy, addressed in handwriting so familiar it had sent a sharp twist through his chest. He hadn't touched it since. He couldn't. Some things, some truths, were too heavy to face until they came for you. And he knew this letter would come for him. It had her scent, her stillness, her gravity. The finality in its weight echoed something deeper than memory. It was from Annalise. Annalise. The name alone stirred echoes of a life that had long since collapsed into silence. A lifetime ago, or perhaps only a breath away, depending on the mood of the heart. She had been his once. Or maybe he had never truly been hers, and that was the tragedy of it. A woman of grace and storm, with the voice of an artist and the soul of a dancer. They met when he was broken, wandering through the halls of a charity hospital in Rome, visiting children's cancer wards in between films, trying to find meaning in grief, searching for something that didn't need fixing because he no longer knew how to fix anything. She was the volunteer who sat beside a dying girl and sang lullabies in 5 languages. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. That's what made him stay. Theirs was not a perfect love, but it was a true one. Unfiltered, fierce, gentle where it needed to be, and untamed where it wasn't supposed to be. They had 6 years. 6 quiet, magical, excruciatingly human years together. And then, one morning, she left him. No explanation, no warning, only a letter on the table and a single line scrawled in ink that had smudged from tears. Sometimes, to protect someone you love, you have to disappear. That was the last time he saw her, until now. Keanu stood slowly, the chair creaking beneath him like an old friend too tired to protest. His footsteps were soft across the hardwood, the room too silent for anything else. He reached for the letter, fingers hovering just above it. His breath caught. Then, with a motion so gentle it almost looked like prayer, he picked it up and unfolded it. The ink was the same. So was the pain. My dearest Keanu, if this letter has reached you, it means I no longer have the strength to run from the truth. And perhaps I no longer have time left to try. There is something you need to know. Something I should have told you the day I walked away. But I was afraid. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I was wrong. He blinked, the lines blurring as his throat tightened. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single heartbeat. You once said your greatest fear was watching someone you love slowly slip away while you stood helpless. I couldn't be that person in your life, Keanu. When the doctors told me the truth about my condition, that it was terminal, that it would be cruel, that it would leave only shadows behind, I made a choice. I chose to spare you the pain I was about to carry. Keanu's legs gave slightly and he sat back down without realizing. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths, each one a battle to stay grounded as the past wrapped itself around him like a cold wind. I've lived quietly, loved you from a distance, and watched your soul grow deeper and gentler with time. You never remarried. I knew you wouldn't, because you never let go, and neither did I. But there's something else, something more important than memory or sorrow. You have a daughter. The paper slipped from his hands like autumn leaves breaking free from their branch. For a moment he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The room spun in silence. He reached for the letter again with trembling fingers. Her name is Leora. She is 5. She has your eyes, your smile when you're trying not to cry, and your quiet way of making everyone feel safe without saying a word. I wanted to protect her from the world I was leaving, and to give you the chance to be the father you were meant to be. The thunder outside whispered in the distance, as if even the skies were too stunned to speak. A daughter. His daughter. Keanu leaned forward, hands pressed to his face, and let out a breath that shook like a broken violin string. Years of silence, of mourning, of unanswered questions, collapsed into the weight of a single truth that felt like sunlight breaking through the fog. She lives with Sophia, my sister, in Florence. I made arrangements. If you wish to see her, to know her, she will be waiting. She already knows your name. She's known it since the day she learned to speak. Don't hate me. I never meant to break you. I only wanted to love you without leaving scars. Goodbye, my love. My time is done. But yours isn't. Go to her, please. Annalise Keanu stood again, slower this time, holding the letter to his chest. He walked across the room to the glass wall that overlooked the garden, now flooded with soft rain and the last glow of twilight. His reflection in the glass looked like a man reborn into an old ghost. He had lived 100 lives, worn 1,000 masks in films, in interviews, in grief, but this was the only role he had never prepared for. Father. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was no longer the quiet of emptiness, it was the quiet before movement, a stillness before the decision. And in that moment, he made one. He walked to the study, pulled out his old passport, a leather bag from the shelf, and opened the drawer where he kept the one photograph of Annalise he'd never shown anyone. He placed the letter beside it. Then he picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. His voice was low, steady, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. "Mark," he said, "I need a flight to Florence, tonight." And just like that, the sentence was final. Goodbye, forever. To the man he used to be, and perhaps hello to the father he was always meant to become. The flight to Florence. The hum of the jet engines vibrated through the cabin like a memory that refused to fade. Low and constant. A sound that somehow mirrored the quiet storm inside Keanu's chest. He sat alone in the first row, elbows resting on the polished wood armrests, his gaze fixed on the stars scattered across the night sky beyond the window. Every few minutes he would blink, slow, heavy, deliberate, like someone trying to remember which parts of his life were real and which were merely scenes from the hundreds of roles he'd played. But none of those roles had prepared him for this one. Not the assassin. Not the time traveler, not the orphan son. This time he wasn't reading from a script. There were no directors, no rewrites, no retakes. This was life. This was real. And the stakes were the highest they'd ever been. In his hands he held the letter again. He had read it so many times now, the paper had softened under the heat of his touch, the corners curled like the petals of a forgotten rose. He didn't need to read it anymore. He had memorized every word. But somehow, it gave him something to hold on to, something to anchor him as the world shifted beneath his feet. A daughter named Leora. 5 years of life, and he hadn't known she existed. What kind of father misses the beginning of his child's story? The thought hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back in his seat, eyes closing for a moment as he let the guilt roll through him like thunder. He had wasted so many years trying to keep his heart locked away behind quiet walls of solitude, convinced that he was safer there, that others were safer without his closeness. After all, hadn't loss followed him like a shadow? Hadn't everyone he ever loved slipped away, one by one, quietly, cruelly? His best friend, his child, his beloved Jennifer, and now Annalise. They all belonged to time now. They were part of the great silence. And he, the man left behind, had learned to live quietly among the echoes. Until now. He opened his eyes slowly as the flight attendant approached, her steps careful and voice soft. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "we'll be landing in Florence in about 20 minutes. He nodded once, offering a polite but distant smile. "Thank you." She hesitated for a moment, sensing the gravity in his silence. "Is there anything you need?" He looked at her, not just with his eyes, but with that piercing gaze that always seemed to see past the surface of people, and shook his head slowly. Not this time. She bowed slightly and walked away, leaving him alone with the stars once more. He turned his head back to the window, but his mind wasn't on the sky anymore. It was on a little girl he had never met, a girl who might already carry questions in her eyes, who might already wonder why her father never came. He swallowed hard. That thought, more than anything else, made his hands shake. What if she didn't want to see him? What if it was too late? The plane touched down in the early hours of morning, just as the horizon began to blush with gold. Florence woke slowly, wrapped in lavender mist and the quiet rhythm of ancient streets stirring back to life. Keanu moved through the terminal with a kind of practiced invisibility. Sunglasses covered the weariness in his eyes, and a soft black cap pulled low over his brow shielded him from the inevitable glances of recognition. But today, he wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't Keanu Reeves. He was a man looking for the pieces of a story he'd never been told. The car ride to Sophia's house was short, but every turn of the cobbled streets felt like another page being flipped in a book he hadn't read yet. He watched from the window as the city passed by, balconies spilling with flowers, children running with fresh bread in their hands, bicycles weaving through morning fog like ghosts. Life here moved gently like a song hummed under breath, and somewhere in this song, his daughter existed. The house was nestled on the edge of the Arno River, its stone facade covered in vines, its shutters painted the color of dusk. It looked like it had held generations of secrets. The driver stopped at the gate, turned and asked gently, "Do you want me to wait?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, I need to walk in alone." He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching lightly on the gravel path. As he approached the door, his heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo through the garden. He raised his hand to knock, but stopped just before touching the wood. What if he said the wrong thing? What if he saw her and couldn't speak? What if she looked at him and didn't see her father? But a stranger. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman stood there, older than Annalise but with the same sharp eyes, same warmth in her face. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him for a long moment, seeing the man behind the silence, the grief, the years. Then she stepped aside. "She's in the garden," Sophia whispered. He nodded once, his throat too tight to speak, and then he walked. The garden was wide and open, filled with lemon trees and wild roses, the morning light casting long shadows over the earth. In the middle of it all, a little girl sat beneath a willow tree, her hands deep in the soil, planting something with care. She wore a blue dress, her curls wild and free, her tiny hands smudged with earth, and when she looked up, he stopped breathing. Her eyes were his, not just in color, but in something deeper. The way they studied the world, quiet and curious. The way they seemed to listen more than speak. She blinked at him once, twice, then tilted her head like someone trying to match a memory to a face. And then, softly, without fear or hesitation, she stood and said, "Are you my father?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was simply a truth waiting to be confirmed. And in that moment, everything he had rehearsed collapsed. The words he thought he would say vanished. He took a step forward, nodding slowly, kneeling until he was eye level with her. His voice broke, but he didn't hide it. "Yes, I am." She looked at him for a long moment, not like a child, but like someone measuring time. And then, gently, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, creased and faded. She handed it to him. It was of him and Annalise, on the bridge in Rome, smiling in the sunlight. "She told me you were kind," Leora said. "She said if I ever met you, I'd feel safe." He swallowed hard, blinking back tears as he held the photo in one hand and her tiny fingers in the other. "Do you feel safe now?" She nodded. "Yes," and then she hugged him, not tightly, not desperately, just enough. Enough to say, "I know who you are." Enough to say, "I've waited for you." And in that moment, Keanu Reeves didn't cry like a movie character. He didn't break into dramatic monologue. He simply closed his eyes, wrapped his arms around his daughter, and breathed, for the first time in years, like a man no longer carrying the weight of silence alone. In the distance, the wind moved gently through the trees, and the sun finally broke free from the clouds. He had arrived. The garden of unspoken things, time in Florence did not move in hours. It moved in whispers, in glances. in the soft rustle of wind that slipped between olive branches and the lullabies of birds that sang above red-tiled rooftops. Keanu Reeves had only been there for 3 days, yet something inside him had already begun to change. He no longer reached for his phone in the morning. He no longer checked emails, appointments, the weight of fame tugging at his sleeves. All that had been replaced by the small and sacred rituals of presence, of watching, of learning, of remembering how to breathe as a father. Leora woke early every morning. She would tiptoe into the kitchen barefoot, her hair a wild mess of curls that looked like the sunrise had woven itself through each strand. She didn't say much. Neither did he, but in that silence was something more honest than any script he had ever memorized. It was the silence of two souls learning how to recognize each other. She would eat slices of pear with honey and ask strange, beautiful questions. Do stars have birthdays? Or, why don't flowers talk if they listen all day? And Keanu would listen as if her voice was the first sound he had heard after a lifetime of silence. He spent those early days walking through the garden with her. She showed him everything. The lavender patch she called her sister bed, because it always calmed her like a lullaby. The flat stones near the lemon trees where she believed ants had secret parties. The treehouse her uncle built, crooked but strong, where she kept a small wooden box that held paper stars, feathers, and a single folded drawing of a man with long hair and sad eyes. Him. The weight of that drawing stayed with him all day. Later, when she was napping, Keanu sat on the bench near the willow tree where she'd first seen him. He stared at the picture she had given him. It was crude and childlike, the kind that adults would call cute and move on from. But to him it was a mirror. In her little world, he had existed before they'd ever met. Annalise had drawn him into her daughter's story even as she erased herself from his. And that realization, though tender, was also devastating. Sophia sat beside him a few moments later, placing 2 cups of warm tea on the bench between them. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him the cup with that quiet grace Italians had when they were offering more than just a drink. They were offering presence. "I see her in her," he said finally. Sophia nodded. "She has Annalise's stubbornness, too." He smiled, but it didn't last. "Why didn't she tell me sooner? Why wait until she was dying?" Sophia finished for him. He nodded. "She was afraid you'd give up everything, that you'd drop your life, your work, your world to come care for her. She didn't want your love to become a burden. She believed dying alone was a gift of mercy to you." He closed his eyes, a sharp breath escaping like a wound reopening. "It wasn't." Sophia placed a gentle hand on his. "I told her the same." The silence returned between them, but this one didn't hurt. It gave space for memory to settle, for regret to breathe. And then Sophia reached into her bag and handed him a small leather notebook. "She wrote this for Leora," she said. "But she wanted you to read it first." Keanu turned the pages slowly. Inside were moments, not grand or poetic, but fragments of motherhood, of life, of love. Today, Leora said the wind sounds like the ocean trying to talk to the sky. She refused to sleep until I sang the song Keanu used to hum. Sometimes I feel like she knows him already, like some part of her was born already waiting for him. He read until his vision blurred, until her voice, her ink, her thoughts, wrapped around him like the arms of a ghost who never wanted to leave. That night, something changed. When Leora came to him holding her bedtime book, he didn't just sit beside her. He climbed into bed with her, let her curl up beside him like she'd done it 100 times. She placed her tiny hand on his chest and whispered, "Do you still live in movies?" He smiled. "Not right now." "Good," she said, "because this is real." And just like that she fell asleep, breathing softly, like waves returning to the shore. Keanu stayed there for hours, his heart sinking with hers, realizing that he was not becoming a father. He had always been one. He just hadn't known it yet. Fatherhood wasn't a moment of declaration. It was the quiet choice to stay, to listen, to be. And now he was. But healing does not come without shadows. The next morning, as they sat in the garden again, Sophia came out holding a letter, not from Annalise, but from the lawyer of the estate. "You need to see this," she said carefully. Keanu opened it. Inside was a formal document, details about Annalise's will, her assets, her arrangements for Leora, and a clause underlined twice. "In the event of my death, I appoint Keanu Charles Reeves as sole guardian of my daughter, Leora Evelyn Rousseau Reeves. He will be given full legal and physical custody, provided he accepts responsibility within 90 days of notice." His hands trembled. 90 days. The clock had already started ticking. He folded the paper slowly, looking across the garden at Leora, who was laughing at a butterfly she believed was trying to land on her hair. He smiled, but there was a weight behind it. He had come to Florence thinking he was visiting her, meeting her, healing the past. Now he had to decide if he would take her home, if he even had a home for her. Leora deserved more than a famous face in hotel rooms. She deserved bedtime stories, first days of school, scraped knees, birthday candles. She deserved normal, something he had never truly known how to give. Sophia sat beside him again. She didn't pressure, didn't prod. "She's yours," she said. "But you must ask yourself, are you hers?" That question haunted him all day. That evening, after dinner, Keanu sat with Leora under the stars. She rested her head on his arm, and they looked up in silence. Eventually, she whispered, "Will you leave again?" He turned to her, his voice caught in his throat. "Do you want me to?" She shook her head. "But I'm scared if I say yes, you'll promise and then forget." He wrapped both arms around her, holding her closer than he had ever held anyone. "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said. "And I don't walk away from people I love." "Not anymore." She looked up at him. "So, do you love me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "From the moment I knew you existed. Maybe even before that," she smiled. "Okay, then I want to come with you. Wherever you live." And just like that, the decision was no longer his alone. It was theirs. A home not yet built. A bond. Already formed, the airport in Florence had never felt colder. It wasn't the wind or the weather. Both were gentle, forgiving. It was the weight of goodbye. Sophia held Leora close, brushing her curls one last time as if memorizing the shape of them. Her eyes did not weep, but Keanu knew the restraint it took. They had all lived in some form of suspended time for the last week, pretending the world outside their garden didn't exist. But reality had arrived quietly, with the soft buzz of the estate lawyer's second call, confirming Leora's transfer of custody to Keanu's care. The paperwork was done. The future was unfolding now, whether they were ready or not. Keanu stood behind Leora, holding her small backpack in one hand and her hand in the other. She didn't cry either. Perhaps she didn't fully understand the depth of what was happening. Or maybe children just knew how to move forward better than adults did. Her world had always been shaped by change. Yet here she stood, steady as stone, with quiet trust in her eyes as she looked up at the man she had just begun to call Dad. They boarded the plane together, the seats feeling too large, too clean, too unfamiliar. Keanu hadn't flown first class in years, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he'd long abandoned comfort for simplicity. But today, he needed to protect her from the weight of transition. So he held her close, wrapped a blanket around her, and whispered stories in her ear, some real, some made up on the spot, each one laced with fragments of things he hoped would anchor her through the turbulence of change. "Once upon a time," he said softly as the plane ascended, "there was a little girl who planted stars instead of flowers. And when the moon asked why, she said, 'Because stars never leave.'" Leora leaned into his chest and smiled, whispering, "You're the star, right?" He closed his eyes. "No, baby, you are." Back in Los Angeles, the world was too loud, the air too dry, the rhythm too rushed. Keanu's home, his fortress of isolation, suddenly felt like a museum of a man who had long ago stopped believing he deserved joy. It was clean, polished, full of books and vintage furniture, but lifeless. Not a picture on the wall, not a single toy in sight. No laughter had ever echoed through those rooms. Until now. Leora walked through the house with curious eyes, dragging her backpack behind her, studying everything like a traveler in a new land. She didn't speak much that first hour, just touched things gently. A framed photo of Keanu and his late dog, a bowl of river stones he kept on the table, a shelf of black and white films. Then she looked up at him and asked quietly, "Where's my room?" He paused. The answer should have been simple, but the truth was there wasn't one. He had never prepared, never imagined. He took her hand and led her upstairs. The guest room was empty, bare walls, untouched sheets, no color, no soul. He opened the door slowly. "This will be your room," he said. "But we'll make it yours together, okay?" She looked around and nodded. "Can we paint the walls?" "Any color you want, even purple?" "Especially purple." She smiled, and in that moment the house stopped being a shell. It started becoming a home. The days that followed were awkward and beautiful in the same breath. Keanu struggled. He was not a perfect man. He burned pancakes twice. He forgot to buy her toothbrush the first night and had to run to a 24-hour store in his hoodie and shades. He couldn't braid her hair. He didn't know the difference between ballet shoes and regular flats. But he showed up, every time, and Leora. She didn't demand anything. She only asked questions. "Do I have to call you Dad?" He knelt beside her. "You don't have to call me anything until it feels real." A pause. "Okay, but I want to." "I just don't know how yet," he smiled. "We'll figure it out." She scribbled her name on the mirror with toothpaste the next morning. Left drawings on the fridge. Named the plants in his garden. She filled the silence with wonder. She filled the house with color. One afternoon, he found her sitting in the backyard with his guitar, strumming nonsense and humming softly. He watched from the doorway, unseen, his heart twisting in ways it hadn't in decades. She was Annalise's daughter, no doubt, but she was something else entirely. A new story, one that he had a chance, finally, to write with presence. That night they sat on the couch watching old cartoons. She curled beside him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. And after a long silence, she asked, "Did you ever want a family before?" He looked down at her, struggling for the right answer. "I wanted one," he said slowly, "but I didn't think I deserved it." "Why?" "Because people I loved kept leaving, and I thought maybe it was me." She tilted her head. "But I'm still here." He smiled, kissed the top of her head. "Yes, you are." And for the first time since she arrived, he felt something shift inside, something like forgiveness. Not for her, not even for Annalise, but for himself, the man who had carried grief like armor for too long, the man who had waited in silence, believing healing was for other people. One morning, they drove past a school. Leora pressed her face to the glass and whispered, "I wonder what it's like to learn with other kids." He glanced at her. "You want to go?" She hesitated. "I think so, but only if you promise you'll be there when it's over." He reached for her hand, squeezed it gently. "I'll be there before the bell even rings." A few days later, they toured a private elementary academy nestled in the hills. The staff didn't recognize him at first until they did, but this time he didn't wear his sunglasses. He didn't try to hide. He was just a man enrolling his daughter, asking about lunch menus and music classes. When one teacher asked him gently, "Do you have any parenting experience?" He smiled and said, "No, but I have love, and I'm learning the rest, one day at a time." That night, after they returned home with school supplies and purple notebooks, Keanu sat at the edge of her bed, watching Leora drift into sleep. Her room was half-painted now, still smelling of lilac and fresh possibility. A small nightlight cast stars on the ceiling, and in her arms, she held a stuffed bear he'd let her choose at the store, her Bravery bear. Just as he rose to leave, she whispered without opening her eyes, "Good night." "Dad." He froze. She'd never said it before, not like that. He turned, his throat tight. "Good night, my star." And as he closed the door behind him, something unspoken broke inside him, softly, gently, like winter giving way to spring. He walked to the study, sat at his desk, and took out a journal. He hadn't written in it since Annalise left. But tonight, he opened to a fresh page, picked up a pen, and began. She called me Dad tonight, and for the first time in my life, I believe I am. The mirror he never dared to face. The days began to pass with a rhythm he had never known before, a rhythm not marked by scripts or flights or interviews, but by the soft sounds of a child waking up in the next room, the clinking of cereal bowls in the kitchen, the hum of school drop-offs, the quiet joy of returning to a house that no longer echoed with loneliness. Keanu Reeves had always lived like a man moving through fog, present but not fully touched by the world around him. Now, with Leora, the fog had lifted, revealing the quiet beauty of small things. Messy mornings, questions asked at midnight, stories told in whispers, and the sudden burst of laughter that only a child could bring, but beneath it all, a shadow still moved. A fear he hadn't spoken aloud, the fear that he might not be enough. It began one evening when he was helping Leora with a school assignment, an art project to create a family tree. She sat cross-legged on the floor, markers scattered around her, cutting out photos from a small pile Sophia had mailed over. Her fingers paused over a picture of Annalise, soft smile, wind in her hair, holding a newborn wrapped in blue. "Should I put her at the top?" Leora asked, glancing at him. Keanu hesitated. "You can put her wherever you want. There are no rules in this house, but if she's my mom and you're my dad, then the silence spoke for him. Leora blinked, her brow furrowing. "Did you love her? Or were you just her friend?" He looked down at his hands, calloused from a lifetime of doing his own stunts, from playing guitar when the world was too loud, from holding grief like a secret. He let out a long breath. "I loved her more than I ever had the courage to say out loud," he answered softly, and losing her felt like forgetting how to breathe. Leora's eyes filled with a kind of wisdom no child should have. "Then I think she'd want to be at the top." She glued the photo to the paper, then placed his image beside it. Below them, she wrote her name in big, uneven letters, Leora Evelyn Reeves. Seeing his last name beside hers did something strange to him, something irreversible. That night, after she went to sleep, Keanu found himself wandering into the attic. He hadn't been up there in years, not since Jennifer, not since the pain of loss had chained certain memories behind locked doors. He pulled open an old trunk and found boxes filled with film memorabilia, love letters never sent, and photos that still smelled of time long gone. In one box, buried beneath a folded scarf Annalise had once worn, was a journal. Her journal. He remembered finding it years ago, reading only one line before putting it away, afraid of what the rest might say. But tonight, he opened it. He thinks he's broken. But what he doesn't understand is that broken things let more light in, and I would rather have his broken heart than the whole world. The words crushed him, not because they hurt, but because they held truth he had refused to see. He had lived like a man waiting for permission to forgive himself. For years he had watched the world move around him, unwilling to step back into it. But now, with Leora's tiny hands reaching for his each morning, with her laughter bouncing off his walls, with her drawing stars in the margins of her homework, he understood. Love wasn't something you earned by being perfect. It was something you gave despite your imperfections. The next day he called his agent. It was time. "No press," he said. "No public statement. I just need time off. Real time. A year. Maybe 2. There was silence on the other end, then a reluctant sigh. "You're Keanu Reeves," the agent said. "The world will notice if you vanish." He smiled softly. "Let them." And so he vanished, from red carpets, from late-night shows, from the blur of fame. He appeared only in grocery stores now, holding Leora's hand as she debated between cereal brands. He was spotted sitting in PTA meetings, wearing glasses too big for his face and nodding silently as other parents argued about science fair themes. He was seen walking through bookshops with a small girl who insisted on reading every single title aloud until they both laughed themselves breathless. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was enough. Still, something inside him knew this story wasn't finished. Not yet, One afternoon, Leora came home with a school project. "Who is your hero?" She handed him the paper and asked him to help. "Who do you want to write about?" he asked. She tilted her head. "You," he blinked. "Me?" she nodded. "But I don't know what to say." "You don't wear capes or fly," he chuckled. "Most heroes don't," she thought for a moment. "Okay, then you tell me what makes someone a hero." He leaned back in his chair, watching her scribble with her tongue poking out in concentration. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, staring at the reflection of the two of them, the shadow of the man who had once been alone, now standing beside the brightest thing he'd ever known. "A hero," he said finally, "is someone who chooses to stay, even when it's easier to leave. Someone who shows up when it matters most. Someone who loves without asking anything back." She nodded, still writing. The next day, she stood in front of her class, hands shaking slightly, reading from her paper. "My hero is my dad. He's quiet like the ocean at night, but when he hugs me, I feel like the stars are listening. He wasn't there when I was born, but he's here now, and I think heroes are the ones who come back even when the world says it's too late." Keanu stood in the back of the classroom, heart in his throat, every word sinking into him like light finding its way through cracks. The other parents clapped. Teachers smiled, but he didn't move, because in that moment, he understood something he never had before. He had forgiven himself. Later that night, as they sat on the porch watching the sky shift from gold to indigo, Leora leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "Do you think Mom can see us?" He wrapped his arm around her. "I think she sees everything." And then, gently, almost like a secret meant for the stars, Leora whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Keanu smiled, his eyes brimming with silent tears. "No, baby," he whispered back. "Thank you for saving me." And under the blanket of night, they sat together, not as a man and a child separated by time, but as a family, held together by a love that had taken the long way home. The last letter, and the door he left open spring came quietly to Los Angeles. Not in some grand declaration of color or thunder, but in small, unnoticed ways. In the way Jasmine crept along the fence behind the garden. In the way Leora's laughter grew louder, freer. In the way Keanu no longer flinched when someone mentioned the word father. Life had found a rhythm again, one that was imperfect and unpolished, but undeniably real. They had built a life together, not out of perfection, but out of presence. The purple walls of Leora's room were now covered in hand-painted stars and taped-up school drawings. The fridge was full of misshapen magnets, the kind that only made sense to the person who made them. The bookshelf, once stacked with existentialist philosophy, now held picture books, bedtime fairy tales, and a collection of journals Keanu had started keeping, one for each year of her life he had missed. He had no way of giving her back those years, but he could make sure the next chapters were written with the ink of intention. One morning, as the city stirred to life beyond the garden walls, Leora came running into the kitchen holding a package. "It's for you," she said, her curls bouncing, eyes wide with curiosity. Keanu turned the envelope in his hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, careful, foreign. A return address. Siena, Italy. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, but not from Annalise. It was from an old woman named Julia, the nurse who had stayed with Annalise in her final days. Her words were gentle, tender. She spoke of you every evening, not with bitterness or regret, but with longing, the kind of longing that waits without expectation. She asked me to send you this, but only when I felt the time was right. I believe now is that time. Tucked behind the letter was a sealed envelope, pale ivory, faintly scented with lavender. His name on the front, written in a script that used to live on sticky notes and birthday cards. He held it for a long time before opening it. Then, carefully, as if unfolding time itself, he broke the seal. "My Keanu, I don't know what today looks like for you. I don't know if Leora has taken to your quiet eyes, or if she's still learning how to let your presence feel like home. But I do know this, she is half of me, and she is all of you. She is your light." I never got to tell you how many times I whispered your name in the dark, how many times I wished I had stayed. But then I would see your face in Leora's sleep, and I knew she was already safe. Because love is not always about staying. Sometimes love is about letting someone go, so they can become more than they are in your shadow. I chose silence because I thought it was mercy. I was wrong. If you're reading this, then I have only one thing left to say. Forgive me, then forget me, and live. Truly live with her. She is your sentence now. Not the kind that punishes, the kind that gives meaning. Goodbye, my love, but only in this life. In the next, I will find you again. Annalise, the words shattered him. He folded the letter and placed it in the box with the journals, his hands shaking. For a long time, he sat in the garden, watching the sunlight stretch across the grass like a quiet promise. He thought of all the versions of himself that had lived and died across the years. The young actor who ran from grief, the man who lost love more times than he could count, the recluse who whispered to ghosts in empty rooms. And then he thought of Leora, how she had entered his life not as a spark, but as a sunrise. Slow, certain, gentle, changing everything with the quietest light. That evening, he made pasta from scratch for the first time. It was a mess. Flour in his hair, sauce on the cabinets. Leora laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. He let her. Laughter, after all, was the sound of healing. After dinner, they sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket. The stars above them blinked like a language only children could understand. I miss her sometimes, Leora said quietly. Me too, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think she sees us? He nodded. I think she watches every time you smile. Leora paused, then looked up at him. What do you think she'd say right now? He looked at the sky, then at the child who had changed his life. I think she'd say thank you for not running. Leora leaned her head on his shoulder. Then I'd say, thank you too. That night, Keanu stood at the window of his study, looking out over the city lights, and for the first time in decades he wrote a letter, not for a script, not for a character, but for himself, for the man who had buried his heart and now dared to hold it in both hands. Dear past, I forgive you for the pain, for the silence, for the days that disappeared without meaning. But I am done living there, because today she called me Dad and meant it. And that is the only title I will ever need again. Keanu, he folded it and placed it in the drawer, then walked down the hall, barefoot, stopping at the doorway of Leora's room. The purple walls glowed with starlight. The nightlight hummed quietly. She was asleep, one arm thrown across her bare, the other hugging the small journal he'd started reading to her every night. He watched her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he whispered in his heart, This is the life she wanted me to have. This is the sentence that saved me. And he closed the door softly, leaving it just slightly open. Always open. For hope. For tomorrow. For love.